All right. Welcome to chapter 5 of the Actix web Rust tutorial, and today we'll be talking about authentication using OAuth. Now, I'll be using GitHub Auth, and that's mainly because it's really simple to set up and it's free for anyone. However, you can also use the same sort of skills to integrate Google, Facebook, Twitter, and whatever other application OAuth service you want to use. So first, we'll need to have some new packages because we'll be managing our session on our server. So we'll need Actix session. We need Actix web HTTP auth, and then we'll also need request for making HTTP request to GitHub's backend authentication API. And you also need these feature flags shown here, and I am using version 8 and version 12 for these packages respectively. Firstly, we'll need to set up some environment variables. So we'll do .env, and I actually don't think, oh, where is my, yeah. I don't think I have .env installed. So let me actually go install that real quick. I'll go add. And this is just so that we can read our environment variables from the .env file. So we don't have to like pass them in through the CLI. And then let's set up the env file. So here we have our GitHub client ID and GitHub client secret. And to actually get those from GitHub is really, really simple. You want to go to your GitHub account, and you can basically go to the settings, and then inside of settings you want to go to developer settings, and then OAuth apps, and you can go into local, or actually if you don't see anything here, then you can just hit new OAuth app, but I have a couple. So we're going to go here, and you can see that you can grab your client ID right here. Now your client secret, you're going to want to keep secret obviously and not share with anyone, just like I did. And then you can generate a new secret, and it might ask you for authentication. I already have one, so I'm not going to go through that process on video, but once it's generated, you'll see a key. You'll have one chance to save it, so make sure you paste it into your env file, and also make sure that you do not commit your env file to GitHub if you're deploying to GitHub, because this is for protecting sensitive data. So once you have that though, we can go ahead and actually start setting up authentication. Really quickly, I wanted to point out that I actually mistyped the feature name for Actix session. It's actually cookie session, not cookie. You can find this by going to crates.io, Actix session, and then if you scroll down the documentation, you can see that the feature flag for cookie session is named like this. So I just want to point that out in case anyone is following along as I go. My apologies. So here we have the session code that we need to go ahead and get started. So we created this user object, which is the basic data that we'll be saving from GitHub, our user ID, our login, our name, email, and avatar URL from GitHub. Here we have a basic index route, and we go ahead and grab the session, which you can see we're passing directly into Actix Web. And the way this works is because we're actually injecting a session middleware into Actix, and then we're setting up the cookie store. We're using our secret key to validate cookies. We're also turning off cookie secure so that it works without HTTPS, and then that way we can go ahead and access it through this route handler. And as you can see, we're also generating a random session secret key. And as my comment says, do not use this in production. You want something that's fixed and manageable and not, random. We're also just returning a HTML document directly in the function body to keep things really simple. And as you can see, we are able to return welcome and login with GitHub, which does nothing because we did not build this route yet. All right, so I've added some more code here to help manage our authentication flow and fully implement logging in using Actix Web Sessions. So what we have here is our index route still. However, we have some new types. We have the GitHub token response and the GitHub user. Now this GitHub user type is pretty much the same as our user type. It's just meant to specifically destructure the GitHub response that it returns in our function, our login function, and that'll be saved into user anyways. And then we also have this GitHub token response, and this is basically what's returned once we successfully authenticate. Because the way GitHub works is we redirect the user to GitHub, they receive an authorization token, and then our server makes another request, and we exchange that token for their access token. And then we can use that access token to basically query the GitHub API for the user details. So because of that, We don't really need this token type in this example or the scope. However, it's still returned from the API, so that's why I have this allow dead code macro here. And the login code is pretty much the same. However, here we are returning some HTML depending on if the user is logged in or not. So you can see if they're logged in, then we return their avatar URL, their email, and the logout button. And if they're not logged in, then we return this login button. And so to log into GitHub, what we do is basically grab the client ID, which is from our environment variable. We have this redirect URL, which tells GitHub where to go back to once a redirect is successful. And I forgot to mention that you do want to actually set your authorization callback URL in the GitHub authentication settings so that when the user clicks login with GitHub, GitHub knows where to send the token back to your server. And then we are just going to build the auth URL and then apply this location header, which just redirects the user. And this GitHub callback function is actually the logic that runs. And we can see we're also getting we're also using this extractor, the query extractor, to get the code out of the request. And then we're just doing some simple parsing logic to get the client ID, client secret, building the token URL. We're also creating a request client. Ideally, in a real app, you would put this request client inside of your application state. That way you don't create a new client on each request. But for the sake of this example, we're just keeping it simple. And so yeah, then we're going to send this request, which is a post request, to this token URL, grab the token back, and then we're going to save it in this token response. And we're going to parse that into JSON, and then we're going to build the user response and then get the user, GitHub user, and turn that result into JSON. And then here I have a debug log so we can actually see the data we get back from GitHub. And then we're going to store all that data inside the user object because that's the type that the session uses. And see, we're using this insert. And then we're going to redirect the user back to the root route of the application, which pretty much just refreshes their page. And then to log out, we're simply going to purge the session and then refresh the page so that they see the new content. And then here we have all our routes set up right here. And so if we go to the page and we refresh, and we can actually open the DevTools to see the cookies that are saved. If I go to application and cookies, you can see that there are no cookies. And then once I log in with GitHub, you see we have some data right here. So we have an ID and then the value, which is the session token that is returned from GitHub. And you can also see that my name is now populated, which is the same. My profile picture, I'm not sure why email is not available. It might be something that I didn't enable, but that's not too important right now, at least for this application. And as you can see in the log, we also get back the avatar URL and my name, and yeah, everything's pretty much working. So that's literally the most basic way to have authentication in your application. All right, and the last thing I want to show you guys really quickly is how to protect your routes using authentication with middleware. Now, the next chapter will get really in-depth on how middleware works in Actix Web, but here's a little sneak peek. So I went ahead and created another route called API/protected, and you can see it says not authenticated. And then if I go back to this route and sign in with GitHub, and then I refresh, you can see that we have protected content for Jamal Lyons. So this was basically implemented using the Actix Web middleware, and it's pretty much this code right here. All right here. Now, it looks pretty complicated if you're not used to Rust. We have all these weird, crazy types. Don't worry though, that'll be in the next chapter. But basically, what you need to know is that we define this new structure and we basically implement a service request handler on that. And what that means is it tells Actix Web, hey, I want to modify the request that's coming in, or I want to read the request that's coming in before it's actually executed on the server. And this is basically how middleware work. And as you can see right here in this call function, which is called by Actix Web, we're getting the session from the request body, and we're checking if the session exists. If it's some, this returns a Boolean, and then we're basically saying if they're not logged in, return not authenticated, which is what you guys saw on the web page. And if they are authenticated, then call the next request or I guess the next handler that'd be called after this middleware. And the code for that is super simple. We're just showing the protected route right here. And we're also just creating a web scope with slash API, and we're wrapping it with our auth struct. So that's kind of how that works. But again, the next chapter we'll go over middleware in detail and also include logs, how to deal with CORS, errors, and how to customize middleware.